fourth question, in a large sense, concerns with the spectrum of problematics. I mean, from the conversation so far, it becomes clear to me that there are stages. And he's at the one end of the spectrum. We have atheism, and the next step is religion in general, or theism, or you may not like the word theism, but anyway, religion in general. And then comes Christianity in particular, and then maybe denominational problems and more particulars. Now, I'm concerned with this first stage. From maybe in each stage, one small question at each stage. From listening to your debate with Dr. Atkins, I see his argument mostly drawn from the natural science field. He says experiment is in the public domain, and follow-up experiment can be corroborated or not, while religion is a private sentiment and unreliable, he says. Is it a bit more like a debate between natural science versus humanities, instead of simply a debate between an atheist and a Christian?
Yes, I think that's right. I think this is a question of the methods of different disciplines. Now, my real difficulty with Professor Atkins is that he has this very simplistic attitude to science. Science demonstrates by experiment. Well, he knows that's not true. He knows that there are many scientific observations which are open to multiple interpretations, which cannot be settled by experimentation. And that I felt he was really giving a very shallow understanding of what science is. And certainly, both Dawkins and Atkins are regularly singled out as being scientific positivists from the 19th century who seem to have been not reading the history and philosophy of science literature of the 20th century. And that's a very serious concern. And I would say to Professor Atkins, is it possible to determine the meaning of life by experiment? Well, I know nobody who would say that you can. That there are some questions that simply lie beyond the natural sciences, and that is not a controversial position at all. What I think Atkins would have to say is, well, maybe that's right, but in that case those questions can't be answered at all. If science can't answer them, nobody can answer them. I would say, I think most would say, actually that's not true, that there are many legitimate questions that science cannot answer, but we want to answer and we believe can be answered. To give you a very, very clear example, what is good and how do we pursue it? Well, there's just no way that the sciences can tell us what is right and what is wrong. But for every person who reads this interview, the issue of ethics is hugely important. And science doesn't help us there. In fact, many people would say science creates the problems here, it's unable to answer. And the point I'd want to make is a writer like, for example, John Polkinghorne, who I think some of your readers will recognize, constantly makes the point that science is always raising questions it can't answer. And I think these are good questions, and I think they can be answered, but not on scientific grounds. So what I see is Professor Atkins with a very inflated view of what the sciences can do, and I think that needs to be challenged.
Yeah, thank you. I agree with that heartily. It is, in my understanding, a scientifically proven argument that the science cannot really produce value judgment.
Exactly.
In that case, we might be able to form a united front with other humanities, those in the humanities discipline, philosophers and literature people, art historians, and history of science people as well.
And also with other scientists who believe that both Dawkins and Atkins are misrepresenting what the sciences can do.
I see. You see it's happening in
Yes, I do. Yes.
In the science.
In the sciences, there are many who are in effect saying Dawkins and Atkins are simply misrepresenting what science says. It's unhelpful.
That's very good science. I remember giving a lecture to my students about the Bruner's idea of truth being different from a Greek idea of eternal and objective and universal. the truth happens,
Yes.
According to
The
word.
Gegnum,
Right.
yes.
Geneto. Right. Arguing against atheism is not quite exactly the same with the arguing for Christianity.
No,
There's a gap.
I agree.
I've been translating into Japanese Peter Berger's book on Christians of Faith, the skeptical affirmation or whatever. The book is really helpful in moving one from an atheist standpoint of view to a very religious point of view. But that does not take us too far, very far, in a sense that you still have to have this. You still have to overcome the scandal of particularity. Why Christianity in particular?
Okay. Let's begin by talking about the scandal of particularity. That phrase was invented by Enlightenment writers such as Lessing being a very good example, on the basis of the assumption there was a universal reason which was universally accessible to all people, and it was publicly accessible, therefore anything that could be known would be known by all people. Now the sociology of knowledge since then has in effect said that is simply not so. Actually, ideas of rationality and of the good are shaped by culture and by history. So actually we have a very distinct situation that the Enlightenment actually is particular. It is an ethnocentric viewpoint,
Yes.
which is not universal. So I think one wants to begin by challenging that. And certainly for me, you can have a particular way of looking at things, which you believe to have universal significance. But why Christianity? Well, I would want to say that for me, part of the intellectual attractiveness of Christianity is its capacity to make sense of what we see, including the existence of other faith systems. And therefore, for me, I would want to argue that Christianity has multiple evidential foundations. In other words, we're looking at intellectual reasons, we're looking at experiential reasons, we're also looking at history. I think all of these are woven together. And obviously, I could talk about this for a very long time, and I'm just conscious we don't have that time. But if I could just make some points very briefly. One of them is that Christianity is able to offer an account for the existence of other religions, and at the same time is able to say what you are legitimately questing for finds its fulfillment in Christ. And that is not seen as condescending or patronizing. It's honoring the common human quest for wisdom, for God, and saying, look, we know exactly what you're finding, what you're looking for, and we honor where you are at the moment, but actually we think there is a better place to which you can move. And of course we see this in early Christian writers when they say Christ is the Logos and the Nomos. Clement of Alexandria, for example. In other words, human wisdom, law, reach their fulfillment in Christ. That seems to me to be a very important point to make, and I see it incidentally in the New Testament itself, that it gives us a basis for respectful dialogue and evangelism.
You mean Logos Christology?
Logos Christology. Here is Logos, wisdom, ancient ways of thinking. That's right. Plato was grasping after truth, so was Aristotle, and what they were honorably seeking is made available. So in other words, you're not saying Plato is bad or anything like that. You're saying he genuinely was looking for it. And actually here is what we think he was looking for, fully disclosed. Think of Paul's sermon on the Areopagus in Acts 17. What you worship as unknown, I proclaim to you, i.e. I make known and name it. So in other words, it's about fulfillment, and certainly that's the kind of theology that was set out at the Great Edinburgh Missionary Conference of 1910. We check the date. Our job is to help people see that.
John R. Mark.
Exactly.
I see.
So that's one way of looking at it. So again, to make this point, there are several reasons why one might be a Christian. You might be a Christian, for example, because it gives you a very strong sense of personal identity. It might well speak comfortable words to you in moments of great distress. And I think both of those are very important. But for me, the thing that made me a Christian was this deep feeling, here is a way of making sense of things which makes more sense than anything else.
I see.
And again, I mentioned a quote, I think, when I gave a lecture earlier to C.S. Lewis. I believe in Christianity as I believe the sun has risen. Not just because I see it, but because by it I see everything else. And for me that's very important, because it says Christianity is like an intellectual sun that illuminates the landscape. We see more things and we see further than any other intellectual sun that's around.
On the second stage here, we have religion in general.
Yes.
And I see you have a book entitled Christian Spirituality.
Yes, that's right.
And it concerns with this spirituality thing. Is it a friend or foe to Christian religion? It certainly gives us a gateway, as you might say. And these days you mentioned the twilight of atheism because of the surge of spirituality, especially among the youth.
Yes, yes.
But these New Age movement in the United States, they are very popular among Japanese as well, and there are all sorts of them. Some of them are not quite, in our understanding, recommendable. So is it really going to help us or hinder us in understanding of Christianity?
Well, I think the answer is a little bit of each. Let me try and explain what I mean. Supposing we have a position here which is complete rejection of God or the transcendent or anything like that, atheism.
Okay.
And then there is Christianity. In between, there is a position which says, well, there's clearly something I don't fully know, I don't fully understand, something beyond me, something spiritual.
Okay.
And I think it's important, I'm not really sure what it is, but it matters to me. Now that is a friend in that it's a move away from atheism, but it's also hostile to us in the sense that it really is not bringing people all the way to Christianity. What we need to do is to say that this is a step in the right direction.
One step.
But that clearly there is a long way to go. And in many ways this is why the early church is so important. Because as they debated with Platonists and with Epicureans and with Stoics, they saw people who were looking in the right direction but had a long way to go. But they felt they could help them to make that journey. So really my challenge to the churches is, how are we going to help people to make that journey?
Second step
afterwards. Exactly, because the real thing is this: there are many people, we know this from experimental field work, who will say, I'm aware there is something there. It's a very, very good phrase, something there. I'm not quite sure what it is. And Christians will have to say to them, look, I think I can help you understand what this is and how to know it more fully. I think that means we need to be prepared to engage with these people, to treat them very respectfully, but at the same time to help them see how this finds its fulfillment in Christianity.
Like Paul in the Areopagus.
Exactly, Paul in the Areopagus, or a writer like C.S. Lewis, who spent a lot of time talking about this.
Because Paul was not quite successful in that.
No, he wasn't, but he gives us reasons to think about this.
Well, some might say that instead of being one step forward, it might be a one step backwards from Christianity. Many of the people in the States as well as in Japan say that, well, I'm not religious, but I'm spiritual.
Yes. And we have identified
unchurched people.
Yes.
And some of the Japanese Christians graduate from the church after 2-3 years of devotion, commitment. And had we succeeded in retaining those Christians,
exactly,
then we would have done a better job.
I think that at this point we need to talk a little bit about Pentecostalism.
Right.
Because in many ways Pentecostalism has been hugely successful amongst young people. Why is this? Well, I think the answer may be this. Because Pentecostalism is emphasizing the direct experience of God. In other words, it's something spiritual. It connects up with where many young people are. And it may well be that Pentecostalism is the bridge between being spiritual and being religious.
I see.
The issue really is that many people who become Pentecostal do not migrate to mainline churches, at least not in the short term. But there is no doubt that Pentecostalism does seem to have some way of attracting younger people who value spirituality but are not sure about religion. So I think we need to think very carefully about what we're doing here.
I see. Thank you. I see you're an ordained minister in the Church of England,
I am.
And you preach very often, in fact. That surprises me as well. But how much are you committed to this particular denomination called the Church of England? And how is the church doing in England? Is it thriving or declining? If it's a mainline church, then it's natural to see its decline.
The evidence is that in England every form of traditional social institution is in decline. And mainline churches are very much part of this picture. It doesn't mean necessarily that Christianity is in decline, but it certainly does mean that church attendance.
So they have shifted from the mainline churches to Pentecostals and
well, younger people are attracted. But let's go back to your first question to me, my commitment to the Church of England.
Right.
My commitment is to Christianity. And I believe the Church of England is a good embodiment of Christianity, and it is the form which I'm very pleased to work with. And I believe that I can make a good contribution by serving the Church of England, but this doesn't mean I would say the Church of England is better than other denominations, and it doesn't stop me working with other denominations. I think really all of us have to belong to a denomination and serve it well and faithfully, and it must be one that we feel basically is right. But nevertheless, that doesn't mean we are dogmatic or triumphalist. It means that we're able to work alongside others as well.
In other words, it was more of an encounter, beginning with the Church of England, that you happen to be a Church of England.
I think that's right. I think it is that I encountered this and I felt it was helpful, knew I could work with it, and I found that over the years I've been associated with it, it's been a good experience. But that does not mean I would say this is the best church or the only church. I would simply say this is a church at which I feel at home, and I'm very happy to serve other Christians in other ways.
I see. So you would be easily able to imagine easily a Baptist, for example, Alistair McGrath being a Baptist, had you had different encounters?
It's quite possible, although I think I would have been a Baptist who was very open towards other denominations.
I see. Thank you. Would you extend that logic to Christianity per se, as opposed to other religions? You wouldn't?
I don't think so. I mean, certainly when I was reflecting, I was making this very important transition from being an atheist to being a Christian. I mean, I had read quite a lot of Buddhist writings, quite a lot of Islamic writings, and really felt that they did not have the same intellectual character that I saw in Christianity.
Yeah.
Now, by that I do not mean that Buddhists or Muslims are lightweight intellectually. It's more that the systems that they represent, I felt, raised very difficult questions which they didn't really answer. And again, I go back to this point that there are various intellectual suns that illuminate the landscape. Some of them, however, are more like moons. The light is dim. For me, the light of Christianity burns brightest.
Thank you. That's very clear. I remember reading Max Weber and saying that even at the beginning of 20th century Germany, people in the working class people have difficulty in believing in Christianity because of the problem of evil, not about doctrines and other miracles and those issues. And especially after 9/11, as you said, mentioned, I remember, I think it was Todd Beamer, by the name of that Todd Beamer, whose wife commented when he perished in that airplane that he was an instrument of God. And Richard Dawkins bites you back on that point. If God is, intervenes in the mundane world at that point,
Yes,
why not earlier?
Oh, exactly, yes.
And you said it is a legitimate question for her to ask why my husband died the way he did. And that was a very interesting argument to me. And the miracle, I should say, has an existential core, to the person to whom the event happened.
Exactly.
For his wife, it is very natural to say that he was made an instrument of God. But that was the utterance that comes only from his wife, not from me or from you, from any observer outside.
Yes, that's right. It's her perception.
Right, and she has a right in doing that.
Of course she has. I think she wants to make sense of what has happened, and that is her way of making sense of it. And Dawkins clearly thought it was ridiculous, but then Dawkins makes the point in his book River Out of Eden that we live in a Darwinian world where there is no purpose, no good, no evil, just blind, pitiless indifference. So, for example, if a volcano erupts and kills 6 million people, well, that's it, that's life. It's one of these things where atheism does not prevent suffering happen. It just denies us any explanatory framework to make sense of it. That's it, that's the way it is, tough. So, one of the questions I sometimes reflect on is this: if everyone stopped believing in God tonight, would natural evil stop happening? I don't think so. But I think there's a deeper point here, and it's a point I find made very well by C.S. Lewis. I'm sure you feel this as well, and I certainly do. When I see something very bad happening, there's something inside me that says, that's wrong. Now, Lewis's question is, where does that sense of that being wrong come from? Why don't we just say, oh, that's the way things are? No, we don't. We feel there's something wrong. And Lewis gives us an argument that goes right back to Augustine, which is that our deep sense that this is not right is an awareness of the fact that this world is not the way God wants it to be. So for Lewis, this very deep sense, this isn't right, this is bad, is actually implanted by God to give us a sense of perspective on this world.
In my understanding, people, including Dawkins, those atheists, deny us the exercise of the human inherent ability to make sense out of things that are unsensible.
Exactly. And there is no doubt that psychologically it is very important for people to look at things that happen to them and try and make sense of them. And interestingly, there's a very large psychological literature which looks at how even when bad things happen, if people feel it happened for a purpose, they can live with it. What they cannot live with is when bad things happen and it's pointless, no reason. And so this doesn't make Christianity right, but it does help us to see that the atheist argument is much, much more superficial than you might think.
Thank you. That's a very good point. I would like to use it with my students as well. A sense to look beyond. You said you used the word beyond.
Yes.
To look beyond something that the human beings can see. It's a naturally endowed capacity for us to, if there's a limit here, it means that we see a limit, by which we mean that we see something beyond the limit. That's why we can, demarcate this as a limit.
That's right. It's over the boundary.
Right.
Yes.
So, in my way of saying that atheists are not exercising fully human power. They are still not fully human, in my sense. They are not exercising what is given to humanity, the power exercise. University and University Church cemetery in a place. And right next to our cemetery, there's a for those members of the Japan Communist Party, right next to each other.
I see. It's intriguing.
And there's a huge, natural rock situated on the very front of the this cemetery. And on it is inscribed these words: "Here sleep our unyielding fighters." That's an atheist's way of remembering the deceased, their colleagues. And then, so even these atheists have to have something.
Yes, to make sense.
To make sense.
Exactly.
So I would like to use my ability to look beyond in a Christian way.